Welcome to the Triclinium, a podcast named after the three-sided table used in the Lord's Supper, where you're invited to join the three of us as we think through matters of Christian faith, practice, and community. My name is Jacob Hawley. I'm here with my co-hosts Nate Lead and Eric Burgers, as always, and today we're going to be discussing worship in the church, its forms, and the ways that we have experienced worship in our lives, and the things that maybe we think ought to stop in our worship. And some unhelpful frameworks for the way that we worship. The boys are giggling because I said that I'm coming in hot on this one. So I want to start with this statement. First off, I'll start here. Nate, how are you? let's be nice first. I'll be nice.
Hot with a banger.
Yeah, real.
Nate, before I destroy you.
I'm not going to destroy either of you, but I have a bone to pick with a common phrase.
Well, I am doing good. I was doing good. Maybe Jacob will ruin my day. Who knows?
No, I'm not going to ruin your day. I promise I won't ruin your day.
No, I'm loving it. We're recording this on a Saturday, and it's been a good Saturday so far. It's nice and rainy here in Dallas, so it reminds us of Oregon. And we're hoping for sunshine soon. But we're loving it, having a good day.
You know, it's raining here in Oregon, and it's reminding us of Dallas. So
it's raining here in Kentucky,
and it is also reminding you of Dallas.
Good old Dallas.
That's funny. Saturdays are for the boys. We got to remember that.
That's right.
Eric, how about you? How you doing?
Doing good. I'm feeling much more rested. I had a really long week the last week, just working, school, and stuff. I ended up dropping a class. I forgot to tell you guys that. But
which one did you drop?
I dropped Christian leadership. It was just going to be too much to handle at once. That class seemed particularly demanding as well.
Yeah. Who needs leadership anyway?
Christian, there's enough of them.
Yeah, so I'll take it at another time. But
the only Christian leader we need is Christ.
Yeah. End of class.
Anyways, but I'm feeling much more rested and better because of that. So I'm good.
How's our boy Briar doing?
Oh, the boy Briar, he's growing every day. He's like getting close. He's starting to put some pieces together for crawling and stuff.
Aww.
And
wow.
He's
That's
like
exciting.
he's very interactive now. Like he clearly understands that Aaliyah and I are his parents and like the people closest to him. So it's
that's
special.
Beautiful.
That's all great.
That's awesome, man. Man, it's crazy to think how different of a life stage you're in right now. Like Lauren and I look at each other and we're like, Eric has a son.
Yeah.
We're like, we're nowhere near having kids right now.
Yeah. That's crazy. Eric, how many months now is Briar?
He was 7 months yesterday. So,
well, congratulations on 7. That's awesome.
Thank
Little
you.
guy.
Thank you. Yeah,
Wow.
he's chugging right along to 1. And
Love
it'll
it.
come. Yeah, it'll come before we know it. It's crazy, but yeah.
And those days go by. I've been watching my nephew grow up, and those like first months they go by so fast. Like you see, there's almost like this element where you see a parents with like a newborn baby, and like it's this rare moment because you see them with this thing that is so small. It's like this tiny person that's so small, but it only lasts that way for about maybe 4 weeks, and then the baby all of a sudden starts looking more and more, like they're developing, and it's crazy. I'm realizing just how fast it is, like it's
it's his first beard hair. And
Yeah.
it's like, you're a man now, son.
It's so
You're a man.
It's so weird because it feels like he's been around for years, like it feels like he's been around forever. It's probably because of how fast he develops that it feels that way. Because I mean, like Aaliyah pulled up a video from like a couple of months ago, and he could barely open his eyes.
Yeah,
Like,
Oh my goodness.
And now he like wants to crawl and stand, and he laughs all the time, and it's so weird. Yeah, but you're definitely right. It goes super duper fast.
Yeah. That's why you just have to keep having kids over and over again to relive those first few months again and again.
Yeah, it comes with its challenges, but I want a lot of kids, so we'll get there.
We'll talk about that one day on the podcast. I hope that'd be a cool conversation. Okay, well I'm gonna throw in my here's a thing I hear about worship all the time, and I don't like it, and I know why people say it, and I don't like it. They say anything can be worship if you do it with the right heart. Mm-hmm. That makes me crazy, because here's why. And it's not, I've heard close friends, I'm not ripping on anybody here. I think it's just one of those things that sounds nice, but when you actually think about it, it's like, wait, what does that actually mean? Mm. I think what they're trying to say is everything can be done as if it's done for the Lord, right? Which is a biblical concept, completely, totally. But worship as a category, as a posture in scriptures, seems to be something that's actually delineated, right? It's not something that just it's not like a frame of heart, right? It's actually a conceivable action. And part of this, I think, is we would get way too deep if I went into this full board, but I think to make it simple, recently we are just now coming out of a period in our philosophical past where everyone was pretty convinced that your mind state or your heart or your kind of your consciousness is the center of your being, and that it can be easily detached from your external behaviors, right? So the kinds of things that are oh, well, I believe in Jesus in my heart, but I don't actually do anything about it. I don't go to church, right? Or I don't do this, or I don't do that, right? We are coming out of that, and people are realizing that your body and your actions are incredibly important to formation of who you are as a person. Mm-hmm. And it's not that you can be well, I believe this one thing in my internal, and then I exude something completely different on my external. And if you just read the book of James, it seems pretty clear that that's the case, right? That you can't do that. But somehow, and we studied in my last class at George Fox, we studied kind of how this developed as a train of thought. Probably started with Hobbes, the philosopher Hobbes, and his take, basically his ability, his way of trying to maintain that people could obey the monarch or could obey the state, even despite their religious convictions, if their religious convictions made them feel uneasy obeying the state, was to say, well, your religious convictions can be private, and you can keep those in your own heart and don't do anything about them externally, and that's just between you and God. And that's how he worked it out in his system. So you could still obey the state, even if it was being disobedient to God, but still claim some sort of faith in God, right? Which on its face is so clearly agended that it's you don't, there's no way that works. Anyways, okay, so there's my preface.
You can see the logic though in his argument, especially when faced with a tyrannical government. It's
right.
Not asking Christians to put themselves in a place where they'll be persecuted by the government.
Right.
So
which is totally what Jesus said.
Which totally, absolutely. But I can see where he's coming from as well. As hey, we still want everybody to be safe and whatnot.
Right.
Totally understand the argument. I thought that you were going to say the separation of spirit/soul and the physical body.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that going back much further. Early Greek philosophy days, because they separated the physical object with its shadow representation. Like a tree is both a physical tree and there is a shadow side that is the idealistic tree.
Yeah.
That tree is hearkening to, or is showing itself to be part of that ideal tree,
right.
Which is a really interesting idea as well. But I had another, to bring it back to worship. It's interesting to think for people to combine everything that you can do and call it worship, when somebody could very clearly be doing an action or whatever that would never be defined as worship, but is still glorifying for God. But they would call that worship as well. It's like, I don't think that there is a continuity in everything, that can be called worship, because worship is in and of itself a particular thing and action that we can do, both in our, for one, in our soul and body. That is one.
Yeah. And I'm not necessarily opposed to saying that worship is something that spans broader than the congregations assembled, clear-cut forms of worship, right? I'm not just saying, no, worship is only singing and only singing to God and only singing the certain hymns that I think are right. I'm not taking that stance either. I just think that it exemplifies a certain splitting apart of the person's external and their internal in a way that is probably unhelpful. If I can say I can murder somebody and it's a form of worship, right? Because murder falls under anything, right? And that, then I think our systems are broken, right? So I would say...
Right, there's a breakdown of definitions, for sure.
Yeah. It's almost like The Incredibles, where it's, if everybody's super, then nobody is, right? If everything is worship, then nothing is, right? Like, right. It makes it so obscure and vague that it's, like, almost unimaginable, unconceptualizable.
Right,
so,
it becomes unhelpful, because it's like, well, then why do I need to go to church to worship?
Right.
If I can just stay home and, sing a song, or I can clean with a heart of worship, it's like, then I'll do that.
right. And it's totally, the statement is totally a reaction to the, I'm guessing it's a reaction to the very staunch and delineated forms of worship that came before it, right? It's kind of a liberating, right? Thing to say, no, you don't have to be in a church when you worship. You can worship in other places. In fact, and then they make the liberty into a law, right? They make it into a rule of itself. Anything can be worship, right? They make it so broad that it's, that it basically poo-poos any kind of congregational approach.
Yeah, I think you're right with that. It seems to be the result of the pendulum swinging from the more, I don't know, I don't want to say conservative, but just the more strict, like, we're in church, we sing, we worship in a particular way, and this is worship defined strictly. It seems like a pendulum swing the other way to say, well, actually, worship is a lot more than that, and in fact, it can be anything.
Yeah.
So I think you're right, Don.
I feel that it's in the same camp as when people say things like, I really feel God when I'm out in nature. Right? It's this way of decalcifying the encounter with God from the community of faith and away from the gospel message and away from the articulations that we've come to. I'm all for, like, being creative and all those things. I just think when you get to that point, it's like, especially for those who are like, nature is my church, right? Like, it's not that, like, I go out in nature and I feel God's presence. Great, so did David, right? Like, that's not a problem. So did Paul, arguably, in Romans 1. That's not what we're saying, but we're saying if you are leaving your church, if you're going out on a Sunday and you're saying, instead of going to church, I'm going fishing because that's where I sense God the closest, you've taken a false turn, right? If you're abandoning worship with your congregation, if you're even, you could say, if you're not spending designated time in worship because you have this idea that, like, worship is almost just this, like, flowing current that can hit you at any time, and you're just kind of waiting for it and hoping that it comes, and expecting it to come, then I think that's where you get into dangerous waters, where you're kind of just letting your appetites and your emotions dictate your approach to worship. But I've been watching Eric type away and scan his screen, so now he's been mounting a response. I'm curious. What do you think?
I'm actually more torn on this than I thought it would be.
Okay.
Because I think there's an element of what you're saying that is true, but there's an element of what they're saying is true as well. If I'm understanding what they're saying right, because like when I hear this statement, how did you phrase it again?
Anything can be worship.
Anything can be worship. Like on the one hand, like I feel like that's kind of right, but just phrased poorly, because I guess I've always seen like someone's entire life as an act of worship, like in everything that they do, because I have a hard time not seeing all things that somebody does as moral, like one way or another. I don't really believe in neutral actions.
Interesting. So I'm going to push into that just a little bit. So to what degree does worship as an activity have a one-for-one correlation
with
to morality? Yeah, that's an interesting thought. Can you worship in a way that doesn't have any impact on your morality?
Yeah, I could be like conflating terms, but I think they are closely related, because like I think, like, let's say for example, somebody makes me mad, and I think I have the option to either kill this person or to not do it, and I think, you know what, killing this person isn't very honoring to God, therefore because of my obedience and desire to honor God, I'm not going to kill this person. Like, I don't know how you don't see that as an act of worship. You worship God because his way, his order of creation is correct, rather than your desire to kill that person. And then if you took the opposite route and you're like, you know what, I really don't like this person, I'm just going to kill them, like, you've worshipped your own decision, like your own concept of the way the world is ordered over and against God's way that he's ordered the world to be. So, like, yeah, I don't know, maybe I'm conflating terms here, because I think you're right on the one hand. Like, I think there's a place where there's something different about worship that happens in the congregation, and we don't want to call, like, me just sitting in nature worship like it is in the congregation. I think there just needs to be a little more nuance in there as to what we mean by that, because, like, we don't want to take, like, the reason that you go to church is because God commands us to go to church, and it's because it's out of our love and obedience to Christ. Like, nobody has to go to church. We do it because we're obedient to Christ and his word, because we love him. That's the beauty about Christianity to me, is nobody has to do anything according to what the scriptures say. We do it because we love Christ, because he first loved us. So I hope I'm not getting too rabbit holey, and that makes sense.
This is good. So I'm gonna go a step deeper here into the confusion, and I'm gonna actually backtrack a little bit, because I think you're right, but I think so. I'll say this. I think that saying worship anything can be worship is vague and not clearly defined. I'm now realizing my attack on it is also undefined.
Yeah.
So I'm running into the same problem
as well. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna try to back up here, and I'm gonna do this. What is worship? Like, let's define it first, and then we can talk about like what is and what isn't, or what it can be and what it can't be. I think the trouble that we will run into when we try to define worship is that there are two, you could say maybe major streams of thought about what worship is, as far as I've looked into it. Maybe there's three, who knows? But two that I can see. The first one is the vague notion of serving something. So to worship something means to serve it, right? And in that case, then it sticks very closely in with what we were talking about with, like, anything can be worship, because you'll hear Paul say things like, do everything to the glory of God, right? Or do all things as if you were doing them unto the Lord, right? So that is like a very intimate connection between our daily lives and serving God, right? Do everything, well, as if to the glory of God, right? The other stream, though, is to like basically say very clearly to bow in not in obedience, to bow in reverence, right? Or to lay down or to like kneel, right? So like there's so one of these is like a very bodily posture, right? Like bow down, right? So what Daniel and his friends are asked to do, that is to bow down. Well, not Daniel, his friends were asked to do. That is to bow down, right? That's not just to serve in some vague way or like in some relational sense. That's a very concrete action, right? I would have to look into the Hebrew on that. I might be wrong there, but that's what I'm guessing. And then on the other hand, it's, to serve, right? So I believe that where we see the word worship in Hebrew, there are a number of places where the word underneath is actually just to serve, or to, to obey.
Well, I'm seeing both of what you're, to put some scriptural meat on the bones of what you're saying. I'm seeing both of those in the broad look at things. Like Romans 12:1 says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship.
Right.
And so that would entail to me service in the way that you're talking about, like we're offering our bodies.
I believe the lexicon for that one would mark that one as service. Like that is the underlying word there, spiritual service.
And then exactly what you said pops up in Psalm 95. It says, "Oh, come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker."
Right.
And so there's kind of an exaltation of Christ, an exaltation of God, and a lowering of oneself before Him. So yeah, I think you're on track here.
It sounds like within the word worship, we have both a general definition of everyday living our life and a specific definition of a particular act. Is that right?
Yeah. And an act that is not just specific in that, like, it's one thing that one person does, but it's universal in that it's like, it is a posture that everyone is to take, right? To bow down or to, right? So here's maybe the question. Like, I think there's an obvious problem in calling both of those the same word because, like, they're different concepts. I think maybe there needs to be some separation of the two, just for clarity's sake. Do you think that we as Christians are called to bow down? Is there ever a time where we're called, and like I'm gonna allow for some you could say abstraction here, though like I still want to maintain like the bodily nature. Like for me, what we do today with the bow down, right? Like that's not common in our culture, but the way that we would do that is our congregation together and the participation in like the sacraments together and singing songs and hymns together. And like if you're super Baptist or non-denominational, maybe raising your hands during worship or something like that, right? Like there is a bodily aspect, right? And I think there's almost something that's lacked if there's not that bodily aspect, right? There's something missing in the Christian's devotion if there's no participation in these bodily forms. We even have Paul talking about, like Paul saying, encouraging churches to speak scripture to one another and to sing hymns to one another and encouragements. And I think, or not hymns, but like spiritual songs is I think how it's translated. And so like, what do you guys think? To what degree are we as Christians called to bodily expressions of worship and devotion in a way that would be similar to bowing down or, like that same kind of essence, that same driver? And how much of this is just the the posture that we hold morally, right, or the posture that we hold as obedient creatures to God?
It's an interesting question because I think we're called to both. I think John 4 clearly calls us to both. And I think separating those two, the I forget who the figure that you were talking about with the English folks and how they are to obey the crown, that idea.
Oh yeah, Hobbes
was raising red flags to me for pretty much every Christian heresy. I don't know why I say Christian heresy. Every heresy that the Christian church has faced in the past, because it always wants to divorce something from something else. Yeah. Gnosticism wants to divorce Christ as a physical bodily being from the spirit. Nestorianism kind of similar in that sense too. We want to separate the divine from the human. There's separation, and no room for unification. So I think that principle of unification in our the way that we think about and desire and understand God internally coincides with the way that we honor and revere and serve God externally. I think they're unified. So let me read John 4, because this is kind of why. It says, "But the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such people to worship him." So I kind of take that as that phrase there, in spirit and truth, as the unification of the two, where the term there, spirit, kind of refers to, I think that verse actually goes on to say that God is spirit, and so it has to do with honoring God with things that cannot be seen or done, and that would include that which is internal to us. We desire God internally, and that gets expressed in truth in what we do external from our bodies, or externally with our bodies, I should say. So that would be along your stream of service. So and how we honor God with our actions and what we do. So
it's an interesting interpretation.
Yeah, I don't like bifurcating those two. That would just seem to get dangerously close to how heresies have popped up in the past, where we're trying to separate that which shouldn't be separate.
Well, and to add to that, and to kind of link it to something Nate said earlier, Nate, you were talking about the Greek notion that what is invisible, or the ideals are the perfect. That bled into Gnosticism. That's how they are connected, right? So I would almost say that Hobbes was in his, you could say in his suggestion. I'm not sure in his beliefs, maybe in his beliefs, but in this suggestion, he's suggesting something that very much was suggested by the Gnostics, right? That the physical, the flesh, can be disregarded. That the outward expression can be disregarded, and that inner contemplation is all you need. So there's the connection there.
Yeah, that's interesting. So something that's come to my mind, to repeat what you were saying, Jacob, just that, we, especially as Christians, we believe in the combination of spirit and body. Those aren't necessarily separated from themselves. In fact, we believe in a bodily resurrection too, which that might be a fun conversation as well. For later,
it's on the list.
But we are our body. We're not just a soul. Our bodies are not just carrying around some internal monologue in our heads. We are our body. I remember a sermon from John Mark Comer, and he kept repeating that. He's like, "You are your body," and that just obviously it was much more than that, but it was was really a really neat sermon, and it triggered just a memory of whenever I get into a prayer posture where I'm actually kneeling or on the ground or in a different position than just sitting, hands folded or whatever, even that in and of itself, head bowed, eyes closed, that in and of itself is a posture. But when I like kneel on the ground, I remind myself like, oh man, like I am sitting before the king, you know, or
Mm-hmm.
I am showing reverence, you know, to the king, to the Lord. You know, it's so there's something about bodily postures. You know, your body is very connected. You know, it's very impactful as well. So, so all that to say, disconnecting the bodily from the spiritual or from your internal thoughts or philosophy or whatever else. I think that's less useful or more confusing than anything.
Well, and to maybe take this a step further then, Nate, in response to what you just said, it's not just when we are positioning our bodies in a way, like, so you could almost think about it in terms of like we have a self, right? We have some sort of aspect of our being that's deep, that's internal, that's you could say isolated from our body, that's isolated from the world around it. But the world around it and the body do, like, they almost are in dialogue with it at all times. And I think we've forgotten that. Like, I think we think that our consciousness is like basically it. That's the total. But like, you're totally right. Like the bodily puts us, it almost helps us direct our consciousness towards something deeper. And beyond that, you could say the communal embodiment, right? So the sense in which we are a body, we are a body beyond just our physical bodies. We are a body together in community. That also helps us to be directed, right? So, like, there's a big difference between worshiping by yourself, even if you're doing it in a physical form, and worshiping in a physical form with others, right? Like, the others will kind of help you to enter into spaces that you couldn't enter into before, and enter into degrees of worship that maybe you can't experience on your own. So I just thought that was a fascinating tie-in there too. It's dual embodiment.
Where two or more are gathered,
right,
in my name, I am with them, or I am there as well. You know, it's like, which is so interesting as well. I love that he made it two, because especially with a ton of false prophets, you know, throughout the ages that claim to have some sort of spiritual divinity. It's like, well, you're just one though.
exactly. And like, that ties into Genesis. We are not meant to be alone, right? Like, there's an aspect to our humanity that dies in itself, and it needs to be reflected by another. It needs to see itself in the other and see its opposite in the other, right? Like, it needs other people.
Man, yeah, I just love that. It's so beautiful too, because I'm just picturing it's reminding me of marriage and how closely it's described to the relationship of Christ and his church, you know, being together as well. So anyway, okay, so let's I would love to actually talk about musical worship in the church, but I don't want to skip past this. So I feel like we should maybe conclude this section and move to the next.
Eric, did you have something to share?
Yeah, I can make a final comment on this kind of section, I guess, that we were talking about right there. I was just looking over some commentary on that John 4 passage to make sure that I'm not butchering anything in it. It's interesting because it seems like almost the opposite problem of what we're talking about, where people are like hyper spiritualizing worship, I guess you could say, almost into dust, to where
right.
It's like some weird like intellectual assent, but like I'm trying to like feel emotions, but there's nothing really attached to it. Like anyways, like that's kind of the context we're like attacking right now, but like in that passage that I just read,
we all graduated from a Quaker school, so we have some respect at least. But yeah, this is a big thing for Quakers. Is everybody sits in a room together and it's quiet and there's no music and it's all quiet and you just think for a while.
But
no need for sacraments.
It's interesting because that
I feel bad. I'm sorry. I'm ripping the Quakers right now.
Yeah, I'm not. I won't say anything more on the Quakers, but
take it up with the Lord. I don't want to hear it.
The opposite problem seems to be true in the passage where it's all physical. Like,
yeah.
Not as much
internal. Which mountain?
The Witch Mountain part. You know, the Samaritans thought that they had a claim to the proper place of temple worship, and it was primarily predicated on the idea of the physical place to go and worship. And then Jesus drops the in spirit and in truth and said God is spirit, like alluding to the Holy Spirit coming so that worship can properly be done in any place because God is dwelt within the believer. So I think that's just an interesting point. So I think there, like, to cap what we were talking about there, is there's a danger on both sides. Like, it can become too physical to where there's no heart desire in it. There's no even like intentional thought about what you're doing and how you are to worship God, to honor him and revere him in the way that he so desires. But then there's the opposite problem of hyper spiritualizing everything to where it's all about emotion. It's all about the feels, and it's all about there's no thought put into it. There's no structure that manifests itself in like physical form. Like you were talking about, enjoying the sacraments and communing with a congregation together. So yeah, to put a cap on that, there's problems in both directions, and I think that passage in John 4 helps to show that unity between worshiping in spirit and in truth.
Yeah, that's very good. And I think if you look at that passage, I'm just now realizing, I think it further grounds your argument where it says, so Jesus' response to the woman in verse 22, it says, "You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews." Right? So he's emphasizing the particularity. And then he says, "Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers," right? So he's answering her question, which is basically, you could conceptualize it as who is worshiping in truth, right? And he says, well, the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, right? So there is that addition of the Spirit into the formula, and I like that idea of the dialogue between the two and the maintaining of a tension and a unity in that tension between the two. Also, just like a quick note, kind of cool. I think this also might be a Trinitarian nod, because Father, Spirit, and Jesus is called the way, the truth, and the life in John. So I think that Father, Spirit, and truth are a Trinitarian formula, perhaps. But anyways, that's besides the point.
The time is coming portion, I think, definitely alludes to that.
Yeah.
So would it be fair to say that we started at maybe an either or stance, and we're now kind of thinking about a both and worship as both a particular act and as both encompassing posture that we live our life through. So I guess, like, I could see just an easy sentence is like, we go to church to worship and praise, and we continue that throughout the week as well, or I don't know, emphasizing both worship, as a particular act, and we continue doing that throughout the week with how we live our lives.
The internal informs the external, and the external informs the internal. And there's no way, like, I don't think there's any getting around that. And so if you have an expression where only the external is influencing the internal, or only the internal is influencing the external, or there's just a complete separation, that they look different than each other, then there's probably something broken, right? Like, there's something not quite right. So yeah, no, I don't think it's wrong to say anything can be worship. I think it just has to be maintained at the same time that there are concrete forms of worship, and that statement can't be used as a way to get out of those concrete forms of worship, right? It's not like anything can be worship, so I'm not going to church anymore, right? There are concrete forms of worship that are needed.
That's oftentimes how that phrase is used.
Right.
It's like a polemic to say, to attack a common Christian understanding of things. Usually.
That's exactly.
Definitely.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, so I don't have to go to church because I have the Holy Spirit in my Bible.
Right. And the opposite is equally ridiculous, to say, you know, I never have to think about, I never have to worship on my own because I go to church. Right? Like, we would all see that and go, well, that's stupid, right? Like, that's...
Honestly, like, both of those are a huge problem in American culture.
Problem. Yes.
Both of them.
Yes.
At the same time.
Yeah, in different places. Yeah. Like, totally problematic. So, okay, that's good. So, Nate, you wanted to move into forms a little bit, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would just love to talk, you know, we're talking about worship, and, you know, started out just as more of a philosophical conversation, and now I just love to dig into a little bit more of, like, because worship is frequently associated with music and praise, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's kind of the first thing that comes to my mind when I hear worship, which maybe it won't be now that we've had this conversation. But I would love to talk about just, like, how you guys have viewed different forms of worship in your church. Maybe like, I don't know. I don't want to, like, compare different traditions or anything like that, but I would love to just talk about music in the church, if that makes sense.
Sure. That sounds great. I mean, we're talking about worship. We gotta talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, like, immediately associate music with worship because music has the particular ability to stir up feelings and emotion that gear you or prepare you to worship in sort of this unique type of way. So it's, like, understandable when people say worship, and it's just common in people's language nowadays that when you say worship, you're talking about the music part of a service.
Yeah.
Right.
I want to make clear that I think the entire Sunday gathering chunk of time is worship. Like, all of it is liturgically, like, whether you're a congregation that has, like, a liturgical plan or not, like, all of it is going to be ordered in some way or fashion, and it's all designed in some way to worship in whatever way it might manifest itself, depending on your congregation. But so for the music piece, I have an interesting question about music too. I think I'll save it for maybe a little.
Oh, just drop it here.
No, I will. I just mean, like, in a second or something like that.
Sure.
But
I thought you were gonna say, like, a different episode. I was like,
no,
sir.
Can't do that.
Honestly, I'm forgetting your original question, Nate. But
well, I didn't really have an original question, so that's why I'm saying go ahead, feel free.
Yeah, the point I just wanted to make is, I think worship is the whole service, but people particularly think of music because it does something unique to people. Like, and I think Scripture actually talks specifically about music in a unique way as well, too. So.
And
I think
beyond,
it's also just the corporate nature as well. You know, like the
that's what I was gonna say.
It draws us, or it calls us all to a particular to join in. You know, especially praise and musical worship. It's like everybody join in because we can all lift our voices, you know, in this way. And oh man, I forgot what I was gonna say. Sorry, Jacob, what were you gonna say?
No, that was it. That was what I was gonna say. It's the one part of most congregational assemblies where you are actually called to get up or to sit down or to whatever and do something, right? Like, there's a response, right? And I would say maybe that notion of worship being the entirety of the service makes more sense, or is more readily like discernible in congregations where it's kind of expected that there's kind of a call and response nature to the entirety of the service, right? Whether or not that's scripted or not, right? Like, I think there's obviously some more charismatic churches or more energetic churches where even the sermon is a place where the crowd interjects, right? Where the crowd is supposed to say, something back. It's so funny. We have we're conservative Baptist in my church, and we're, most people are kind of the type where they lean more the Presbyterian, just sit back, watch, see what happens, right? And kind of passively engage. And then there's like a couple of people that, maybe they grew up in the South, or maybe they're just used to that form of worship where it's, much more engaging. And so like you'll have like 5 people in the congregation of like, 300 people who just scream out, like, amen, 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 preach it, that kind of thing. I love it so much.
Not as common here as you might think. I don't think. I have not experienced it that much.
Well, you're going to an SBC church, right?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't entirely surprise me because there's a pretty deep interweaving between the Presbyterian past and like, an SBC church, right?
Yeah, the history of it it's interesting, yeah.
Yeah. But, I think there are certain cultures and there's certain expressions of church where that's much more common, and it's much more easy to see the participation there and see like the worship. But I still think all of it is worship. I would agree with you, Eric. The whole thing is worship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a number of questions I'm thinking of. I'm trying to think of which one I want to ask at the moment, because let's go with something Nate just said there, because you used a specific word there, Nate, when you were talking about worship, and I think the word that came to mind for you is praise. And I guess my question was going to be is like, is there room for other like emotions or genres to be within worship music, like singing and the songs that we use, other than just praise? Is the whole thing praise, technically speaking? Like, should praise like be interspersed in the music that we're singing together, or like can a whole song maybe be something more like lament? Or
no, certainly. I mean that's kind of the thing though, especially with musical worship. I think that the Lord has taken no L's, frankly.
That's
so
great.
I think that even
I want that on a t-shirt.
Even in lamentations or lamenting songs, it's still praise, because God's providence still shows up in those songs as the rebuttal to the lament. Even in sadder, slower, more depressing songs, the Lord is still glorified in that, and I would say that He's still praised, at least in modern church worship, where some sadder songs are praised. I'm sure that there are songs that really are, questioning the Lord and, are asking really hard questions, and, they don't offer up praise in that way, but I haven't heard those songs in church. But I think that lamenting songs can be praise, if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I would agree totally with what you said. Jacob, you look like you want to say something. I'll let you go ahead before I continue.
Yeah. I have heard a lot recently, like, the church doesn't know how to lament, the church doesn't know how to mourn, the church doesn't know how to sit with negative emotion. And it's totally true. Like, the church is genuinely, I think, has like a something disconnected in how as a Christian to like approach mourning and lament. However, I totally agree with Nate here. Like, the Lord has taken no L's. So like, even when it's like, I mean, I think that's the gospel, kind of, is like there is an ultimate yes that that transcends every no, right? Like that goes beyond every moment of like the closed door or the broken relationship or the person dying. It's like that's literally the hope we have. So I think it's okay to sit in the emotions of like, it doesn't feel that way right now. But the more that I like actually look at our worship songs, at least the ones we sing in my church, there's always, or not always, but most of the time there's some element of darkness. It's just, it doesn't stay there. It doesn't start with, you know, like, I was broken, I was looking for a way out, you know, and I was, I was trampled on, all these things, and then just be like, and I'm still there, the end. Like, it expresses a hope. It expresses a turnaround. Yeah. And I think that's actually required in the church. Like, you have to have hope. Now, it can be a hope that's kind of like vague. It can, or not vague, but like it can be left unarticulated. And I think that's maybe what they're looking for, is like, let's be less quick to put the period on something, because it doesn't. I think the real problem that we have in American mourning is not that we don't mourn, but that we're impatient with mourning. We want to get to the good stuff quicker, right? And I think that's maybe the problem. If you're, so there's a song. It's a Christian rap song by Propaganda that I'm thinking of here. It is, I think it's called Crooked. I think that's the song. You might have heard it if you've been around those musical circles, but it goes on. It's a long song, and it basically is him ranting against the depravity, the crookedness of humanity, and he goes on and on and on. And if I remember properly, at the very end, he has kind of this hopeful upturn, but it's very like it's at the last few seconds, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a much better way of approaching it, because like you really sit in that song in all of the brokenness, and you feel the anger, and you feel the sadness, right? You mourn and you lament and you get bitter, and it kind of helps you accrue those emotions, and then it comes to the culminating, hope that we have.
There's two things I want to add here, because on the one hand, I think songs like that are very reminiscent of the patterns of the Psalms, like specifically the lament Psalms that you'll think about. It'll be like David, like, why is this happening? Why is this going on? I'm confused. Like, the wicked are trampling all of God's righteous people.
Right.
Like, God, why is this happening? But I still trust in you. Like, right at the end. I still trust this is going to work out.
I will be redeemed.
Right at the very end. So that's very reminiscent of the Psalms in my view. And most of the times where you get something where it's like lament, 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 only lament, like I'm thinking of some of the books of the minor prophets. The one I'm thinking of in specific is escaping me at the moment. It might be Hosea I'm thinking of. Like, there's just like questioning God, or even Job too. At specific points of Job is like, why is this happening? And that's it. And then God is like, you're a finite, tiny little human being. Like, trust in me. Like, trust in me.
Yeah.
Like, your mind can't understand the depths of the universe.
Like, I'm God. Like,
Job's response is very short.
I work things out in the goodness of my wisdom. You know? So it's. Anyways, but the second thing I was going to say, and I'm going to get a little bit reformational here because I've been reading some Martin Luther recently too. It's like,
love Luther.
Yeah, is the law and gospel distinction. And I think in American culture today, perhaps there's too much of an emphasis on the benefits of the gospel without understanding the law that goes along with it. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of a funny way of phrasing it. I get it, but like, we want the benefits of Christ. We want salvation. We want heaven specifically. That's a big one. And I think that manifests itself in the songs that you see in pop evangelical culture today. You'll see whole entire songs which are like, I will sing your praise. We love you, God. I'm gonna walk according to
I hate that.
I'm gonna walk according to your way,
because I know I'm not. So I like when I start
we're gonna
singing
sing we're going to sing really loud because we just love you, God. We love you. You give us salvation. And then there's like not a hint of exactly what you said, Jacob, of the depravity of human beings. Like, you can't properly understand the depths of the grace of God if you don't understand the depths of your own sin first.
Yeah.
So, like...
Well, yeah, exactly. You can't understand... you can't understand Christ as Savior without understanding your need for a Savior.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. So, if you haven't pondered, like, your sin and how offensive it is to God, and like how oppositional it is to how He literally created the world, like how can you understand how great of a Savior, how like majestic and beyond understanding, like God taking on human flesh and dying on behalf of you? How can you possibly appreciate that if you don't understand the background context to that coming? And like I'm saying, like, I think that manifests itself in the songs, and then people are like offended when there's songs that like talk about how we're not as great as we think we are. Like, we're way more sinful than we think we are. And
definitely,
I see that personally, and like specifically in evangelical culture, like we've lost sight of the, to use Luther's type of language, you know, we've lost sight of the law portion. Like we don't understand how we've transgressed God's law, and because of that, like it's manifested itself in us only wanting not the gospel, but the benefits of the gospel, and not Christ, but the benefits that Christ brings. And
right, exactly. Well, I mean, you know, especially today. I mean, especially our culture today, modern people, especially in America. I mean, we are just obsessed with comfort.
Oh yes.
You know, like how many industries are completely designed around making your life more comfortable? Like, even now, pharmaceutical companies are developing drugs to combat grief. Like, like you're not supposed to feel.
Oh my gosh,
grief,
that's horrible.
right?
Wow.
Like, don't you understand? That's just a natural human reaction. You know, it's like that's kind of the upside down nature of the cross of Christ's kingdom. You know, is that hope is found in the brokenness, right? Like even in Christ's broken body. You know, Christ was killed, and that's where our hope lies, because He defeated that. He overcame that. He overcame the greatest. It's like the most definitive thing that can happen. People don't come back from the dead. And He overcame that. So,
we saw. I saw this meme recently that said, it was like one of those, you know, like text-based memes where it's just like, you know, like a dialogue, and it was like me like saying like, you know, hey, Jesus, we remember the day that you died every year, and he goes, oh good, what do you call it, like what's the name of the holiday? And we go, bad Friday, because we call it Good Friday, right? But I think there's something really important about that contradistinction there, right? Like, it's like we are putting the label good on something that on the day that it happened could have been seen as good by almost nobody who was for the cause of Christ. Like, it was like the disaster that was wrought by humanity, the crucifixion of God, like the worst possible thing.
Think of the reaction of every single disciple of Christ. Like, think of the road to Emmaus story in Luke.
Yes.
You know, like those two guys walking on the road were devastated.
They were devastated, and they knew everyone else had heard the news of how how devastating it was. So, I've been reading, of course, I've been reading Bart, and in his epistle to the Romans, he's so clear about like almost what would you say? He wants to say there is no human hope. there is nothing good, right? Like, once the law has completely negated everything that is human, right? Once everything falls under suspicion, everything is critiqued, then and only then can you have a real gospel. Like, only when you realize the absolute no that God says to humanity, can you hear the yes, right? The yes is only discernible past the like blinding no. So, you know,
amen.
Amen. And amen. Yeah. What? Okay, we're up on an hour now, so I'm gonna close with this question because I think it's important, or not important actually, that important at all. But I think it's kind of a fun question. People debate constantly, like, can we use Hillsong worship? Can we use Bethel worship? Are there
it's literally a part of my seminary courses.
Yeah. So here's the question in a more broad term. What importance does it play? How important is it that our songs reflect the minute elements of our doctrine? Like, how important is it for our community?
I think that's interesting you put it that way, because most, like, the way I've heard it and heard people's problems with Hillsong and Bethel is less about the contents of the song and more about the contents of the church itself. The church is behind the songs. So, like,
I mean, I've definitely heard criticisms of, like, Reckless Love. Like, should we?
Yeah,
that too. Don't get me wrong. So, there's some of those songs out there that people will criticize. But the problem is like, a lot of their songs, like, you go through the lyrics, and there's nothing, like, overtly, like, wrong about any of their songs. You know, it's the fact that, like, people have problems with the doctrinal teachings of the churches behind the songs, and when you listen to those songs, royalty checks are being written for, or you use them in your worship, or you just have it personally.
So it's the question of supporting an entity.
Yes, that's more of the criticisms I've heard revolving around Bethel and Hillsong.
Well, maybe I just haven't been in these conversations enough, but
yeah. But to your credit, the critique that you were just saying, though, still exists. It's still there. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But
so what's your response to that criticism? Like, you know, if you guys were to start a church, would you be comfortable using songs from Hillsong, Bethel, whatever other scary? Those are the ones I hear the most, but there's probably.
I think that's a highly circumstantial question, because it's going to depend on who's a part of your congregation. At the end of the day, like, if somebody comes to me and just insists, like, and there's, like, multiple people in the congregation who insist on using Bethel or Hillsong, something in the worship, that, you know, isn't doctrinally compromised, I might not have a problem with using the song. That being said, like, personally, if I'm setting up the music and the songs in which we're using in our congregation, like, I don't have any Bethel or Hillsong on my playlists. Like, I guess part of the reason is exactly what I was saying, is I think they're sketchy doctrinally in the first place, but more so because I just think their songs are dull. Like, I think, like, it's
roasted.
We're coming after you.
Well, I'm just being honest. Like, it's usually, like, just repeats like the same verse like 18 times, and then the song is over. You know, and there's there's no depth, like, to their lyrics whatsoever, and it's, like, oddly, like, romantical too, like, romanticized. So like, I don't need Jesus as my boyfriend. Jesus is not my boyfriend. Like,
he's your groom.
Yeah,
Eric.
Yeah.
The mystical groom.
So yeah, I much prefer songs, hymns, spiritual songs that have some depth to them. And, like, personally, I don't think Hillsong and Bethel, like, encapsulate the scripture, the way the scriptures, I think, would have us design our worship services. So that's why I would exclude them.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective, Eric. I think if I were setting up the worship playlist for a church service, I probably wouldn't include Hillsong or Bethel songs. Well, but I wouldn't only exclude them, because I'm not a big fan of worship songs that are super stylized or really heavy on performance and lead vocals, for one. Like, worship songs that are more about the performance, I think should be de-emphasized.
Amen.
Because, thanks, Eric.
I'm gonna just start shouting that out on the podcast now.
Amen.
Because I think I don't have a good singing voice. Okay, I'll just be upfront with that. I can't sing very well, and so when somebody is on stage and they have a really good voice, and for one, I'm jealous, which I'm working through, but it's like when they either when I don't even know what to call it. I'm not very musical, so
when they riff their voice, and
right? When they riff, when they do the up and down, all that. It's like I can't follow that, and also I don't know when they're gonna stop and when they're gonna start up again. When it's so artistically stylized, I think it's beautiful. I would certainly listen to it just on my own, but in a worship service where everybody is supposed to be joining together and singing with one voice, and those who are able to sing with one voice, and we're being called into that posture, and then you have somebody on stage that has a very particular voice and is so just gifted, and just goes off the rails with their talent. It's like, man, it like I was joking earlier, but it invites just comparison, judgment even on them. I think that it's emphasized a lot because we love performances. We love performers. So
yeah,
I totally get why it's here. But I think that, if I was hiring a worship pastor, I would just want the plainest Joe Schmo person who just guides everybody else into worship. That's a worship leader, is guiding everybody else. So,
I have no problem with. I think we should get the most talented people possible on the worship stage leading worship. I have no problem with that. It's a humility thing. I want the most humble person I can find leading the worship service, whose tendency is not to riff, even though they know that they can. They know that they have those capabilities. The posture of the worship leader should be exactly what you said, shepherding the congregation so that we're all raising our voices and our hearts to God in unison with one another, rather than because when you're riffing your voice up and down or singing obnoxiously high or dramatic, what that's
or
communicating,
you just belt out.
what that's communicating is you're trying to bring attention to yourself on your personal musical capabilities, rather than using the music as a sign pointing to Christ. So there has to be a balance in a built-in humility of the worship leader, in my opinion, to where even though they know that they're talented or that they have capabilities, they don't want to outwardly express that to where they're trying to draw attention to themselves.
Yeah, I was trying to find a quote from Life Together, Bonhoeffer's Life Together. I couldn't find it, but there was a part of Life Together where he talks about that, and he talks about how, I can't remember if he excludes instruments in worship, But like Bonhoeffer was very like musically set. He could have been a musical artist if he wanted to be. Like that was a pathway that people were trying to get him to go down. And so the fact that he says like worship's really important for the community, and it's important that the community feels like a community while they're worshiping, and it's not like just some performance. Like he really emphasizes that. Like it is the body coming together to worship, and nobody, basically I think it was like nobody should be singing in a way that makes other people feel self-conscious about their singing, right? And so that same thing, like no riffing, no solo work, nothing to emphasize or any of that. I really like that notion, and I'd say like if you've ever been a part of a small group before that's done worship, like in a home setting where no one's really trying to impress anybody else, there is a certain beauty to that you cannot get when you're being led by somebody that's professional and there's a whole stage and all that. I get even a little uncomfortable with the idea of being up on a stage with with worship. Like there's something about that feels there's no way to not make it feel like you're a professional there, right? There was something
at one point I was totally in favor of putting the band at the back of the sanctuary.
Yes.
Yes. Like and you can still have the stage or whatever, and because when the sermon's happening, but like to make it not look like you're either praising or worshiping the band or there for the band. I was like, put them behind everybody. Yeah. And let your voices flow together forward.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, as I did this class this weekend, yesterday, one of the things we did is there's a chapel on campus at Southern that's modeled after, I think it's First Baptist Church, Rhode Island. So I think which was like literally the first Baptist church in America, if I'm not mistaken, at the time. It's modeled after it. Mm-hmm. But the way that it's structured is that the organ and the musical instruments are on a balcony up and behind the congregation.
Yeah.
And it's a Puritan style chapel, and so there's like a very elaborate big pulpit there, to show the centrality of the word. But to your credit, Nate, like with what you're saying is, I think that's existed in the past, So.
Yeah.
There you go.
I really like that. We experimented for a little bit in our youth group with having the worship band. Like it was hard because it was oriented, like the space was oriented for a stage, but there was a cross at the back of the stage, and so we tried to make it so that during worship, like all the band was like kind of sitting with the rest of the people, right? So like they were kind of in front, but like back facing the people, right? And and off to the side. And I loved that. Like I felt like that was I felt like that was closer to the ideal than the other side. But I'm at the same time, one thing that we need much less of in the church is criticism, and so I don't want to become like just like
certainly
we need better, we need different worship, and we need that like I'm willing to kind of
everybody complains about worship.
The essence of worship is the heart posture and the willingness to participate of the people, right? So even if you have something like Hillsong or whatever, and it's a concert style, and there's 20,000 people, and everyone had to pay to get in. If everyone's
it's better than nothing.
It's better than nothing, and if everybody's participating for the love of God, literally, right? Then wonderful. That's wonderful.
Yeah, I'll finish us with a quick story. So when I was on staff at the church, I was working with outreach and all that, and so I went up to Wheaton University for an outreach conference. And that was a super fun experience. It's just a 2-day conference, like midweek. And there was just a bunch of companies there, people from all over Chicago area and just the U.S. We had speakers there from all over the world. And it was super fun to be a part of because they were all talking about outreach. So we had people from Australia talking about what the church looks like and the ways that they're reaching people there. We had people from Chicago come in for like breakout sessions and talk about the ways that they reach the people around them. And it was awesome. And so one thing that they included in that conference was a time for worship, which is great because it is an integral part of, you know, what we do. And so I love it too, just like giving praise to the Lord, even when we're not in church, you know.
Yeah.
It was great. And so they invited a local Christian band to come in and play songs, and they were very talented. The singer was great, but he definitely struck me as just kind of like, man, if I met this guy in, you know, like a restaurant or whatever, he'd be, you know, he's just a normal guy.
Yeah.
But he led everybody in such a way that, like, I left that worship experience feeling more connected to the people around me. I went alone too to the conference, so I'm surrounded by strangers, and I left that worship experience feeling more connected to those people because he pointed us back to the Lord and invited us to worship together. And so there was a point, actually, you know, I'm a pretty low-key person. I don't put my hands up in church. I don't put my hands up to praise. But he invited us, like, hey, everybody, like, just for this next part. He had a much smoother way of doing it, but he's like, hey, let's all put our hands up. And that was just a really small example of a worship leader inviting the, I'll say, congregation or just the audience into a shared posture for, you know, a bit, and having it really be just giving the glory to God. And I put my hands up. I was like, man, this is like, I feel comfortable doing this. Like, he was able to lead me into that worship space, surrounded by strangers. You know, I'm, you know, 1,000 miles from home, all these things. So, I just want to say that to encourage worship leaders to be leading their congregation towards worship.
Here's the quote that one of the quotes I was thinking of from Life Together. Thank you, Nate. As difficult as it is, unison singing is much less a musical than a spiritual matter. Only where everybody in the community is prepared to assume an attitude of devotion and discipline can unison singing give us the joy that is its alone, even if it exhibits many musical shortcomings. You know, and we've all been behind the person, you know, or maybe have been the person. I know I've been this person who's making some real blunders as they're singing, and yet, you know, the beauty is that's the it's the true and honest response of the church to what Christ has done. So
I love that.
Yeah. So I'll go ahead and wrap us up here. If you have any comments or questions, suggestions for topics, anything like that you want to talk to us, you can reach us at sophomorosofficial@gmail.com. That's SOPHOR. I'm sorry, I'm going to try that again. I was trying to go fast, but it didn't work. SOPHOMOROS official@gmail.com. Thanks for listening to this episode, and as always, may Christ be exalted.